Welcome to Understanding the Bible with Pastor Stephen. This is season 5, episode 9, Circumcision. Now, I have mentioned this before because it came up in another podcast, but the modern debate seems to be that many groups are calling male circumcision genital mutilation. And they're attacking Christianity because of that. And I've seen groups online, social media, stuff like that. Um, and so I wanted to cover this topic because there's two ways that it is very relevant to us. One is physically, if you have a male child, you're given that option when they're born, right? And the other one is the spiritual side of it, the New Testament, the circumcision of the heart. So we're going to talk about that. What is circumcision? What are the objections to it? Why did God command it in the past? And why does God no longer command it? So finally, if your family has a baby boy, should you circumcise him or not? So let's go ahead and get started. What is circumcision? Well, the definition is the surgical removal of the foreskin, which is the sheath of skin covering the tip of the penis. It's typically performed on newborns or infants for medical, religious, or cultural reasons. So, what does the Bible say about it? Well, in the Bible, it was first mentioned to Abraham. So, everyone prior to him was not circumcised. Adam was not circumcised. So, we're looking at Genesis 17, verse 10. God was talking, and he said to Abraham, "This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and your seed after you. Every man child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you." So that's the reason right there. "And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations, he that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger which is not of thy seed. He that is born in thy house and he that is bought with thy money must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man child whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant." Now, there you go. That's the Old Testament. That was the command given by God. So, what are the objections to it today? Well, one, of course, they say it's bloody child mutilation. Two, they say there's no medical benefit. And then three, they attack it strictly as a religious or American thing or a Jewish thing. You know, you have the Jew haters, which are coming back in the world today. So let's look at those objections. First of all, the bloody child mutilation is actually an objection from the very beginning. Um, Not Abraham, but Moses. So roughly 400 years later, Exodus 4:19. "And the Lord said unto Moses in Midian, Go, return into Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. And Moses took his wife and his sons, and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the God of rod in his hand." So this was right after the burning bush. "And the Lord said unto Moses, When thou goest to return into Egypt, see that thou do all those wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thine hand, but I will harden his heart, that he will not let the people go. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. And I say unto thee, Let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn. And it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him and sought to kill him." So God stopped Moses on the way. Remember, he took his wife and child. His wife was not Jewish. She had no concept of this circumcision. Clearly, God explained why he was going to kill Moses, because Moses was going to do something, but he had not circumcised his son. So even though he was going to do something for God, he had violated the covenant that God made with Abraham and said, all of your seed, your sons, must be circumcised. Moses hadn't done it because it wasn't cultural for his wife Zipporah to circumcise their son. So verse 25, Exodus 4, verse 25, "Then Zipporah, which was Moses' wife, took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, Surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let him go. So God let him go. God did not kill them. And then she said, A bloody husband thou art because of the circumcision. So this was clearly an objection to the people of the day that this is bloody child mutilation. But because she saw the power of God, because her husband forced her to do it, she circumcised her son. So this has actually been it's not something new. It is bloody. It is disgusting. It is painful to your child. Okay? I'm not denying any of that. But what was the purpose? So we'll get to that in a second. But these are the objections to it, okay? Another objection is nowadays with science and technology and everything, they say there's no medical benefit to it. It's purely religious. It's a terrible thing to do to your son, and there's no medical benefit. Now, I've found the National Institute of Health.gov actually lists medical benefits to it. I'm not a fan of the NIH. I do not believe the government always tells the truth. So I'm not advocating for circumcision due to medical reasons listed on a .gov website. Okay. But it says that infant circumcision in the US is primarily driven by cultural tradition, which is that a biblical reason to do it? No. Hygienic preference, is that a biblical reason to do it? No. Medical benefits, if that's true, that would be a biblical reason because we're told to take care of our bodies, right? And continuing the quote, aligning with family, societal, or religious norms. Norms, which is just things that groups of people decide to do, are not biblical reasons to do it. Okay. So we're talking just medical from the National Institute of Health.gov. So the medical and health reasons that they list are reduced infection risk. Circumcision reduces the bacteria that can accumulate under the foreskin, lowering the risk of urinary tract infections in the first year of life. Now, when you're older and you learn how to bathe yourself, it's not a problem. But in the first year of life, it can help. They say it also helps with disease prevention. Evidence suggests a 50 to 60% reduced risk of female to male HIV transmission, as well as a 30% lower risk of transmitting HPV. They also list long-term health benefits. The procedure is associated with a reduced risk of phimosis, which is an inability to retract the foreskin. Very small percentage of men have that problem, but also a reduced risk of penile cancer and a lower risk of the herpes simplex virus 2 transmission. The American Academy of Pediatrics also notes that while health benefits do outweigh the risks, it is not significant enough to recommend routine or universal circumcision. So there you go. Um, People who say there's no medical benefit, that's not precisely true, but the medical benefit may not outweigh the risks of performing a surgery and cutting, you know, part of your body. So that's one of the things that people argue against it. It's for medical reasons. And then another reason is people will say it's just religious or it's just an American or just a Jewish thing. So almost all objectors to circumcision are anti-Christianity. It appears to me to be another movement simply started because in America, they hate the fact that we were founded on God and the Bible in our culture. So they're trying to remove anything that has religious overtones or biblical overtones. And this is clearly a biblical thing. The Jews do it because of the Old Testament. And all of Western culture does it because we're Judeo-Christian. We're founded on the Jewish culture and the Jewish freedoms and the religious principles in the Jewish religion. So all of Western society does this. So it is a Christian-based movement, or I say that because Jesus was a Jew and it was commanded to the Jews to do this. Okay. But it is a global practice. It's no longer just religious. There's high prevalence in the religious world in Israel, parts of Africa, which is where Christianity first was, the Muslim world, but it's all over the Western world. And it's now a non religious thing, most common in the USA. It's very uncommon in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. And while highly prevalent in American culture for health or cultural reasons, it is a widespread ancient religious practice across many cultures. And this data appears to provide historical basis in the Jewish tradition, and later Christianity spread to Africa and the Western world. So they estimate approximately 1/3 of the world's population of men are circumcised across the continents. So you can't really say in this present day it's only Christian, but you could see in history it's the Christian and Jewish religion that has spread it through most of the world. So I'm not saying everyone who has their child circumcised is doing it for religious reasons, even though that may be its roots. So I would argue that these three objections to it all have a bit of truth to it. It is bloody. There may not be enough medical benefits, and it did start out as religious. So I can see the arguments for these things against it. So let's look at what the Bible says. The first thing we're going to do, of course, is we are going to be looking at the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, we see why God commanded it. Number one, it was a sign of the covenant with the Jewish people, with Abraham. It's detailed in Genesis 17, 9 through 14, and it was a permanent physical marker of God's promise to Abraham to make him a father of many nations and to be his God and the God of all of his descendants. So that's huge. It was also reiterated in Joshua when they went into the promised land that God required the Jews to do this. I'll read that one to you, Joshua 5, verse 2. At that time, the Lord said unto Joshua, make these sharp knives and circumcise again the children of Israel the second time. And Joshua made him sharp knives and circumcised the children of Israel at the hill of the foreskins. And this is the cause why Joshua did circumcise. All the people that came out of Egypt that were males, even all the men of war, died in the wilderness by the way after they came out of Egypt. Now, all the people that came out were circumcised, but all the people that were born in the wilderness, by the way, as they came forth out of Egypt, the 40 years they were wandering, them they had not circumcised. So there you go. And then in verse 8 and 9, it says, it came to pass when they had done circumcising all the people that they abode in their places in the camp till they were whole. And the Lord said unto Joshua, this day have I rolled away the reproach of Egypt from off you. That's interesting. So that symbolizes the purification. It represented the cutting away of the sinful nature of the flesh. And of course, later on, the Jews, God highlighted the need for the heart circumcision or circumcision of the heart, if you look at Deuteronomy 10:16. But this was primarily to signify their separation and their consecration as his people, distinct from other nations, set apart for God's purpose. It was also a required act of obedience to God. And it was a foreshadowing of the preparation of the gospel. If you look at Colossians 2, 11 and 12, in the New Testament, physical circumcision was basically no longer needed. It was referred to as now a spiritual circumcision, focusing on faith rather than the physical act. All right. Then the next one I wanted to look at was, let's see, which verse? Oh, well, I wanted to just go ahead and give my opinion on those verses. Okay. And then we'll talk about why God no longer commands this circumcision. So, my opinion on all this is that it was the only way, like the number one way to know that a man was committed to God. Sorry, that's it. I'm not saying that every man thinks with that head, but I am saying that every man treasures that part of his body in various ways. All you got to do is ask a guy if you can hit him in the arm, right? Punch him in the arm, and then ask a guy if you can punch him in his private parts. Guarantee you, he's going to tell you no and be like, "What the heck is wrong with you?" Right? This is something that is guarded and protected by all men. That God's just put that in us. I mean, obviously, because it can be painful to be hurt down there, but we also, that's the only way that we can have sex and have children and form a family and have a legacy and build an empire. And like, if we don't take care of that part of our body, our entire reason for existence is gone. So when God told adult males to be circumcised, that was a surefire way of knowing that that man was committed to obedience of God. For him to intentionally cut his penis like that was a lasting mark. You see that for the rest of your life, and you would remember that, I guarantee it. Not just, having it done to your kid when they're newborn or 8 days old. But anyways, my point is on that obviously is when God asked the Jews to do it, or a new foreigner who chose to follow God, this made it glaringly obvious that you are committed to God. It set you apart. It made you different. And it reminded you every day that you had done that to yourself. Now, another reason God did that was blood has always been a requirement for justice. In God's eyes, that's just fact. Blood is special. Leviticus 17:10 said, "And whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, that eat any manner of blood, I will even set my face against that soul, and cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul." Now, I don't know if it's just because of the DNA or there's some supernatural tie with our blood to our soul, or if it's just special because that God chose it to be special, and that is the life of the body is in the blood. And when God did creation, those first 6 days of creation, and he did blood in the animals and in the humans, that God just decided that that was important. I don't know why particularly, but I do know that very clearly God says the blood is what makes atonement. So making a small blood sacrifice like circumcision is completely in line with the whole Bible. Now, if there are health reasons, then obviously they are positive, but it would be secondary to mere obedience. So that's why I think God commanded circumcision in the Old Testament. But we do know why God no longer commands it. If we go to the New Testament, God said clearly that there will be no more sacrifices. His intent is commitment and obedience to him in the heart, not so much the outward signs. And so let's go over some of those verses. Jesus is all that is required in the way of blood sacrifices. Hebrews 10, verse 1 says, "For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never, with those sacrifices in which they offered year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. For then would they not have ceased to be offered, because that the worshippers, once purged, should have no more conscience of sins. But in those sacrifices there is a remembrance again made of sins every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sins." So God revealed in the New Testament that just making the sacrifices did not take away sins, but God required it in order to take away sins. Okay, so we're getting to the idea that It is your heart motive, your heart attitude that is more important than a sacrifice. So think about all of this in regards to circumcision as it being bloody and a sacrifice to set yourself apart to God, right? Verse 5. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, that's Jesus, he says, sacrifice and offering thou wouldest not, but a body hast thou prepared me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin thou hast had no pleasure. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, to do thy will, O God. Above, when he said, sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings and offering for sins thou wouldest not, neither hast pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, that's the sacrifices, that he may establish the second. That's the body that he said he was preparing. So again, we're in Hebrews chapter 10. Look at verse 10. By the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And every priest standeth daily ministering and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God. So Jesus went back to heaven and is sitting on the throne, right? Verse 13. From henceforth expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. For by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified, whereof the Holy Ghost also is a witness to us. For after that he said before, This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my law into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. Now where remission of these is, there is no more offering for sin. All that to say, once Jesus came, he is more concerned with our hearts and our minds than sacrifices. We do not need blood sacrifices anymore. So God's intent is commitment and obedience to him, not circumcision, not sacrifices of bulls and goats. Jesus speaks of heart matters and motives being much more important than the outward signs. So I'm going to list off some Bible verses. You can look these up in your own time. I'm just going to read a couple of them to you. Matthew 15, 8 and 9. Matthew 23, 25 through 28. This one says, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within you are full of extortion and excess. You appear righteous, but within you are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. So it doesn't matter about your outward appearance. It doesn't matter that you get circumcised if your inside isn't right with God. Mark 7, verse 20 through 23. Matthew 5, 21 to 22 and 27 to 28. John 4, 23 to 24. Matthew 9, 13 says, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. So all of this goes to show that circumcision is no longer part of the Christian religion, despite the attacks and accusations of the non-religious people. So remember, Christianity is what Jesus teaches, not what the Jews taught. Christians follow Christ Jesus. That's why we call ourselves Christians. Christ was in the New Testament. He brought the new covenant. He got rid of the old covenant or fulfilled the old covenant. Okay? So the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, in this regard, circumcision is clearly a historical record, not a command to do it. So it was commanded by God in the past. Therefore, it cannot be a bad thing. It cannot be a sin because God cannot sin, nor does God command people to sin. In the New Testament, Jesus clearly was a Jew in every way. That means Jesus was circumcised. It was God's law at the time of Jesus' birth. It wasn't until Jesus made the sacrifice on the cross and died and rose again that he fulfilled it, brought in the new covenant, and said, no more sacrifices. So it was God's law at the time of Jesus' birth. So if he had not been circumcised, he would have broken God's law, and not be allowed to be a part of the covenant of the Jews, and therefore could not have fulfilled the law and the covenant upon his death and resurrection. Therefore, Jesus was circumcised, and circumcision is a good thing. Does that make sense? All right, I got one more for you. There are New Testament teachings on circumcisions in the book of Romans. I'm going to quote a couple of these verses and then just give you some to write down. Romans 2:25 through 29. For circumcision verily profiteth, if thou keep the law. But if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made as uncircumcision. Now, Jesus said that nobody can keep the law. Everyone has broken one law and therefore is guilty of them all. So therefore, if you have circumcision and you break the law, it's as if you're not circumcised. So what difference does it make? Verse 26. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his circumcision be counted for circumcision? Shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? And shall not uncircumcision, which by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge you, who by the letter and circumcision dost transgress the law? So he's just going back and reiterating that if you get circumcised because you're following the law of the Old Testament, then you need to be judged by the law of the Old Testament, and everybody's broken the law of the Old Testament. So again, what difference does it make? Verse 28, for he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly. And the circumcision is of the heart in the spirit, and not in the letter, meaning physically, whose praise is not of men, but of God. What advantage then hath the Jew, or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God. So he's showing the reason that the Jews are still God's chosen people, that they are special, not because they followed the law and got circumcised, but because God gave them the oracles of God. That's the Old Testament, the words of God. And you can read more about this in chapter 4 and in chapter 15. Also, here's the list of verses. 1 Corinthians 7:18 and 19. It says, is any man called being circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. So if you're called to be a Christian, you've been circumcised. There's nothing wrong with that. Be proud of it. It's not like you should be uncircumcised. Then it continues, is any called in uncircumcision? Let him not be circumcised. So now if you have a pagan, someone who's not a Jew, if he is called to become a Christian and he's not circumcised, Paul says here in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, don't get circumcised. Circumcision, verse 19, is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of God. Then you have Galatians 2, verse 3 through 5. Then you have Galatians 5, verse 2 through 6. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you that if you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised, that he is a debtor to the entire law. Christ is become of no effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, you are fallen from grace. For we through the Spirit wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Jesus Christ neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but faith which worketh by love. Also Galatians 6:12 through 15. Also Philippians 3:2 through 3. And Colossians 2:11 through 13. So it comes down to this. If your family chooses, or if your family has a baby boy, should you choose circumcision? That's the question. So when God created the earth, was Adam circumcised? No. God said his creation was good. Adam was perfect, being uncircumcised. Adam had no sin. Therefore, being uncircumcised is good. When God commanded the Jews to get circumcised, was it a sin? Of course not. So it would not be a sin if you get your son circumcised. Remember, right and wrong don't change, guys. The only thing that changes is your heart motive, which could be a sin. If you do it for the wrong reason, you might be sinning, but it still would not be wrong or a sin laid up against your infant child because they didn't choose to do it. So you could have the wrong heart motive, thinking you're holy, you're fulfilling the law of the Old Testament, you're a better Christian because you are still trying to follow all the laws that God gave to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses. And you might feel like I'm better than these other Christians in this society and I know better than them. And you could have a selfish, self-righteous, prideful attitude about getting your son circumcised. And now you have sinned, but your son has not. I hope that makes sense. So when it comes to that choice, it is ultimately up to you for whatever reasons you choose, so long as your heart is right. Romans 14:22. Hast thou faith? Have it to thyself before God. Happy is he that condemneth not himself in that thing which he alloweth. And he that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he eateth not of faith. But whatsoever is not of faith is sin. This is where Paul is teaching that acting against your conscience, doing something while doubting whether or not it is a sin, becomes a sin for you because you are not doing it out of faith. So do it or don't do it. Just don't stress about it because God does not condemn either choice. So in summary, real quick, if you want to share this with somebody, just share from this point forward. This summary right here tells you everything I've talked about today. 5 points. Number 1, God commanded circumcision to set the Jews apart from the rest of the world, to have a physical sign among the leaders of each family of the covenant between them and God. That covenant doesn't exist with us. The world has many objections to the things of the Bible, but God commanded circumcision, therefore it's a good thing. Also, God no longer requires it, therefore uncircumcision is a good thing. So be thankful. This is point 5. Be thankful of the freedom we have in Christ. We are literally free from ritualistic sacrifices, ritualistic dress, ritualistic speech, any other religious requirements that people of this world hate. We don't have to do. So be thankful, especially if you're a male and you choose to follow Christ as an adult. Be thankful that you don't have to cut your penis and rip your foreskin off as a symbol of sacrifice and obedience to the God of the Bible. So act like a free believer in Jesus Christ. The chains of sin and ritualistic sacrifice have been let loose from us. Today, we choose to follow Christ and do things for him out of our free will and the love that he's done for us. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep searching for truth.